All right, so you know how we like to really get to the bottom of things to find the roots.
Yeah.
Well, what if you took us straight back to ancient Greece for this one, to like the birthplace of Western philosophy?
Wow.
Yeah. So we're going deep with this YouTube video. It's called La Filosofia dell'Antica Grecia, Radici del Pensiero Moderno from the Do You See It channel. And we're going to pull out those foundational ideas.
It's incredible to consider that amid the hustle and bustle of ancient Athens and the Agora, these radical new ways of thinking about the world were emerging. And they marked a significant departure from the mythological explanations that had dominated for so long.
Right. Like, forget the gods and legends for a second. Our first stop is Thales of Miletus.
Okay.
So picture him like by the Aegean Sea, watching the constant changes of water, like from waves to mist to ice.
Okay.
And his big idea was that water is the fundamental element, like underlying everything in existence.
Well, that may appear simple to us today, but the real breakthrough lies in the shift in perspective it represents.
Yeah.
Thales wasn't relying on divine stories or myths. He was directly observing the natural world, seeking a unifying principle through that observation.
Right.
This was a pivotal moment, the birth of a scientific approach to understanding reality.
Absolutely. And then his student, Anaximander, kind of came along. So imagine a group of these early thinkers just gathered under an olive tree, hashing out these new ideas.
I like it.
And Anaximander, he takes it a step further.
Okay.
He proposes the apeiron.
The apeiron.
Apeiron, this like infinite, boundless origin of all things. Makes you think, right?
It really does, and it's interesting how it resonates with modern cosmology,
Yeah.
The idea is that humanity has this enduring quest to find that fundamental origin, whether it's Anaximander's apeiron, this undefined, limitless source, or our modern theories about the universe's beginning, perhaps as a singularity.
Right.
It emphasizes how our abstract modern ideas still echo these ancient desires for understanding.
Absolutely. And there was an Anaximenes, and he kind of looked around and said, well, I think it's all air.
It's all air.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But he didn't just like randomly guess this. He even offered a demonstration.
A demonstration.
Remember when you were a kid and you blew on your hand, open mouth, it was warm?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But if you purse your lips, it's cold.
Yes.
So what he was doing there, he was actually showing how a single fundamental substance, air, could have different states.
I see.
Just through changes in like density and temperature.
Interesting.
It was a very early intuitive step towards our modern understanding of states of matter, solids, liquids, gases.
Right.
And how they, relate to each other.
Of course.
Now we move on to Pythagoras.
Oh, yeah.
Philosopher, mathematician, a bit of a mystic.
Bit of everything.
So picture his followers on the island of Samos, maybe studying music and the relationships between numbers.
Okay.
And he believed the whole world could be understood through numbers and their proportions. Sounds kind of abstract.
Well, it might seem that way at first, but the key takeaway is how incredibly ahead of his time Pythagoras was.
Right.
Modern physics and mathematics continually reveal this underlying numerical order of the universe. Think about the equations that describe gravity, electromagnetism, the fabric of space-time.
It's wild.
I know. Pythagoras sensed this fundamental relationship between mathematics and reality.
Yeah, and then there's Heraclitus, who is sometimes called the obscure.
The obscure. Oh, okay.
Yeah, picture him by a river, making his famous statement, you cannot step into the same river twice.
Ah, right.
Now it sounds like a riddle.
Sure.
But it really speaks to the constant change and flux that he saw as the core of reality.
So if everything is constantly changing, what does it mean for something to be?
Good question.
It's like what Heraclitus is trying to point out is this profound dynamic nature of existence.
Okay.
And it connects strongly with modern physics, especially relativity and quantum mechanics, where the universe is understood as this field of constant activity.
Now, in complete contrast to that is Parmenides.
Okay.
He argued that change is an illusion.
Really?
True being, he said, is unchanging, indivisible, and eternal.
Wow, that's quite the opposite of Heraclitus.
Totally different. But what's fascinating is how this seemingly abstract concept connects to concrete principles in modern physics.
Oh, okay.
The key is in Parmenides' idea of an underlying, unchanging reality.
Okay.
This echoes the laws of conservation of energy and matter. So while things transform and rearrange, the total amount of energy and matter in the universe stays constant.
I see.
Okay, now let's talk about Democritus.
All right.
So about 2,500 years ago, he had this radical idea that everything is made up of tiny, indivisible particles that he called atoms.
Atoms, I bet.
But he couldn't even see them.
Wow.
It's amazing. Without any tools or instruments, he had this intuition about the building blocks of reality. And his idea of atomism is a clear precursor to modern particle physics. And his ideas about how these atoms could interact to produce thoughts and feelings even foreshadow some aspects of neuroscience.
It's incredible.
It really is. Now let's talk about Socrates, a true icon. Picture this unconventional figure wandering around Athens, engaging people with these seemingly simple questions, like, what is justice?
Right.
Or what is the good? And get this, he never wrote anything down.
Wow.
But his student, Plato, thankfully, documented a lot of his thought.
Okay.
And the lasting impact of Socrates is the power of his method, the Socratic method, this relentless questioning of assumptions to arrive at a deeper understanding.
Yeah.
And that's still a cornerstone of education and critical thinking today.
Absolutely.
And his focus on self-examination and the pursuit of virtue really laid the ethical groundwork for Western philosophy.
I see.
Now, Plato went on to establish the academy,
Right.
essentially the first university. So imagine a serene garden, with columns and young minds are gathering for intellectual discourse.
Okay.
And get this, above the entrance was inscribed, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here."
Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here.
Yeah, that tells you something about their emphasis on reason and logic.
It does, The key insight is Plato's understanding of the importance of reason, abstract thought, especially mathematics, as tools for acquiring knowledge.
Right.
So the founding of the academy was huge.
Huge.
It formalized this pursuit of learning and created a space for intellectual inquiry.
And then we have Aristotle, perhaps Plato's most famous student. This guy was an intellectual powerhouse. He systematically explored and wrote about almost everything.
Wow.
Astronomy, biology, politics, ethics, you name it.
Amazing.
And his work on logic became like the standard textbook in European universities for over 2,000 years.
Wow. Aristotle's approach to knowledge and his emphasis on empirical observation and logical reasoning had a huge impact on Western thought. Like, his framework for understanding the world laid the foundation for many scientific disciplines, and it still influences how we organize and analyze information today.
Now let's fast forward to the Hellenistic age, the period after Alexander the Great.
Okay.
So Greek culture and thought spread widely, and new philosophical schools emerged, particularly in Alexandria. So imagine this vibrant city, a melting pot of different cultures and ideas.
This era marked a shift in focus for philosophy.
Yeah.
It placed a greater emphasis on the practical questions of how to live a good and fulfilling life in a complex world.
Right.
So the key development here is the rise of distinct schools of thought, each offering different paths to happiness and well-being in the aftermath of huge societal upheaval.
So first there's Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium.
Zeno of Citium.
And it's said that he was originally a merchant of purple dye.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the Stoics, they taught that true happiness doesn't come from externals. It comes from controlling your responses and developing virtue.
That sounds familiar, Like, that's a very modern idea.
Yeah, and the Stoic emphasis on inner resilience, self-control, acceptance of things we can't change, that's timeless. And it still informs a lot of modern therapy and self-help.
Right, yeah.
Now, then we have Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus.
Okay.
Now, when most people hear Epicurean, they think about indulgence and fancy feasts.
Yeah.
But the real Epicurus, he advocated for a life of simple pleasures, avoiding pain and anxiety and strong friendships. And he welcomed all sorts of people into his school, which was pretty revolutionary at the time.
So the key takeaway here is Epicurus's nuanced understanding of pleasure as tranquility.
Right.
And his focus on simple living, intellectual pursuits, close connections. That resonates with a lot of modern positive psychology and mindfulness.
Totally.
And it highlights this enduring need for peace and meaningful relationships.
Okay. And finally, there was skepticism, particularly with Pyrrho of Elis.
Pyrrho of Elis.
Yeah. And legend has it, he traveled with Alexander the Great all the way to India and encountered some really interesting thinkers there. And then he came back to Greece and advocated for a radical idea that we can't really be certain about anything.
Really?
So the path to inner peace, ataraxia, is by suspending judgment.
So this brings up a question about knowledge and certainty.
Yeah.
The key insight of Pyrrhonian skepticism is this recognition of the limitations of human reason and the potential for error in how we make judgments.
Right.
And this ancient skepticism even foreshadows ideas in modern science like the uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics.
Right.
It reminds us to approach information with a critical eye, especially in our world today.
Now, these Greek ideas didn't just vanish. When the Roman Empire came along, they embraced and adapted Greek philosophy. Even a Roman emperor like Marcus Aurelius wrote his famous Meditations in Greek.
Really?
Yeah, deeply influenced by Stoicism.
Interesting.
And Seneca, he turned Stoicism into this practical guide for living well. And people still read his works today.
Yeah, the Roman embrace of Greek philosophy is what ensured its continuity and influence throughout the Western world.
Yeah.
The key takeaway is that these philosophies provided the basis for ethical and moral reasoning that shaped Western civilization.
Okay, now what about the Epicureans?
Yeah.
So the Roman poet Lucretius, he took Epicurus's complex ideas and made them into this amazing poem called On the Nature of Things.
On the Nature of Things. Okay.
And he talked about atoms, the void, the origins of the cosmos, and he did it all in verse.
Oh, wow.
And this poem was lost for centuries. But when it was rediscovered during the Renaissance, it lit a fire.
Right.
Thinkers like Giordano Bruno, Galileo, Isaac Newton, they all engaged with these ideas.
So Lucretius preserved and transmitted these ideas that challenged the status quo and helped fuel the scientific revolution.
Yeah, exactly. And then skepticism. It had this surprising revival during the Middle Ages.
In the Middle Ages.
Yeah, so thinkers like Augustine and Michel de Montaigne, they used skeptical arguments to actually argue for faith. Yeah, suggesting that because human reason is limited, true knowledge had to come from divine revelation.
That's fascinating.
It is, and this skeptical thinking continued into the Enlightenment. So René Descartes famously started his philosophy by doubting everything.
Right, right.
And in the 20th century, even thinkers like Ludwig Wittgenstein and postmodern philosophers explored the limits of knowledge. So these skeptical ideas just kept coming back.
That's right. From debates about the very nature of knowledge to the interpretation of scientific findings, skepticism is still important.
Absolutely.
And it encourages us to be critical and intellectually humble.
Okay, so how do these ancient Greek ideas show up in our modern world?
Yeah.
Especially in science and technology.
Sure.
We talked about Plato's theory of forms earlier.
Right.
And it sounds super abstract. But how does that relate to something like computer programming?
Well, it's an interesting analogy, you know.
Okay.
Think about object-oriented programming. You define abstract classes, these blueprints, templates for creating objects.
Right.
And the individual objects you create based on those are like imperfect copies of those blueprints.
Okay.
That's like Plato's perfect forms.
I see.
The core idea is that there are these underlying abstract structures that lead to the concrete world, whether it's philosophical ideals or software. And the belief held by many mathematicians, people like Roger Penrose, that math truths exist independently of us is a very Platonic viewpoint.
Yeah, okay. What about Aristotle's logic?
Okay.
Remember those syllogisms? How is that relevant in our tech world today?
Well, Aristotle's logic is fundamental to computer science.
Right.
Boolean algebra, the bedrock of digital tech. How computers process information using true or false, that comes directly from Aristotelian logic.
So when my computer runs a program, it's using Aristotle.
Essentially, yeah. When it performs logical operations like AND or R not, it's based on principles he articulated. His system of categories even helped lay the groundwork for modern biology and how we classify living organisms. And even his concepts of form and matter find echoes in quantum field theory,
It's amazing.
where particles are understood as excitations of underlying fields, energy, and matter interconnected.
So the atomists, Democritus and Lysippus, their idea of atoms, how does that compare to what we know now?
It's remarkable, you know. Modern physicists, they're exploring quarks and leptons at the Large Hadron Collider,
Right.
and they're basically continuing that ancient inquiry.
Wow.
It shows the power of the idea that matter is made up of these fundamental units. And even string theory, which suggests the universe is made of vibrating strings, echoes this Pythagorean idea of underlying mathematical harmonies and Anaximander's apar. Some cosmologists see similarities with the multiverse theory, the idea of many universes coming from one fundamental state.
So the physical world has deep roots in these ancient ideas. What about psychology? Plato's allegory of the cave always felt really profound.
It's a powerful metaphor, you know.
Yeah.
Neuroscientists today, they're exploring consciousness and subjective experience.
Right.
And they're dealing with the questions Plato raised, the difference between perception and knowledge, limitations of our senses.
Wow.
David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness, how do brain processes create feelings?
Yeah.
That's a modern framing of Plato's material-ideal dichotomy.
It's wild.
And Libet's experiments on free will,
Yeah.
they directly engage with this ancient philosophical debate about free will versus determinism, something explored by Democritus and the Stoics.
Okay, so in the field of AI, are there any connections there?
Tons. When AI researchers develop machine learning algorithms, they're implementing a form of the Socratic method.
Right.
Yeah, these algorithms, they learn by constantly questioning and refining their understanding based on the data they get. Neural networks learn from huge amounts of data.
Right.
And that's similar to Aristotle's induction, inferring patterns from examples.
Wow.
And the ethical challenges in AI, like bias, fairness, accountability.
Yeah.
We're trying to program AI with the good, something Socrates dedicated his life to figuring out.
It's crazy how these ancient ideas keep showing up. What about quantum physics? Is there anything there?
Yeah, there's some interesting overlap. Parmenides' concept of a single, unchanging reality is kind of like the idea of a fundamental quantum wave function underlying everything. Bell's theorem, which demonstrates the non-local nature of quantum correlations, aligns with Parmenides' intuition about interconnectedness. And Heraclitus, with his dialectical view and emphasis on the unity of opposites.
Yeah.
That resonates with the idea of quantum superposition, where particles can exist in multiple states at the same time.
So from the smallest particles to the cosmos, the Greeks had insights. What about our world today with social media and the internet?
Plato's world of forms idea takes on new meaning with VR and the metaverse.
Okay.
We create avatars, inhabit virtual spaces. Aren't we engaging with digital versions of ideal forms? Social networks are modern agoras.
Right.
Influencers, maybe the new sophists, compete for attention, and algorithms are like oracles predicting what we like.
Yeah.
And those echo chambers online,
Yeah.
those are like Plato's cave.
Yeah.
We can mistake filtered information for reality.
That's scary.
It is. And with all the information overload, Epicurus's idea of moderation and simple pleasures becomes really relevant.
Yeah.
Digital minimalism, taking breaks from tech, that's like applying his wisdom.
I like that.
And Greek dialectics is in machine learning algorithms, training a neural network through backpropagation, adjusting connections based on errors. That's like the Socratic method. And language models, like large language models, so like sophists generating arguments and exploring different viewpoints.
Wow.
And they deal with the same questions about truth and language that Plato did.
Okay, let's talk about economics.
Sure.
How does their thinking relate to cryptocurrency and blockchain?
Aristotle's ideas on exchange and just price, that's helpful for understanding principles behind crypto and decentralized economies.
Okay.
When we talk about smart contracts and DAOs, we're trying to create systems based on unchangeable rules. That's like Plato's ideal of justice. Blockchain, with its permanent record of transactions. That resonates with Parmenides' idea of an unchanging reality. And DeFi is like a modern take on direct democracy, but applied to finance.
It all connects.
It does. And in economics today, studying complex networks, that's where we see Heraclitus' idea of constant change.
Yeah.
Everything flows. That's like our global financial markets and information networks. Chaos theory, the butterfly effect, all of that reflects the ancient Greek idea of a complex and interconnected cosmos. And today, those concerns about digital privacy, that's like the cynics who focused on individual freedom, digital sovereignty, privacy rights. These are like modern expressions of that ancient desire for independence.
Okay, let's talk about ecology and sustainability. What insights did the Greeks have on our relationship with nature?
Well, the pre-Socratic philosophers, they saw nature as a living whole.
Okay.
And that's very aligned with ecological thinking today. When we talk about the interconnectedness of ecosystems, we're returning to that worldview.
Right.
And Heraclitus is saying about the changing river, that has new meaning with climate change and potential environmental damage. The Stoic concept of sympathia, this interconnectedness,
Yeah.
that's super relevant for understanding ecosystems. And their idea of living in accordance with nature is a basis for modern sustainability. Even bioethics and genetic engineering. That echoes the Prometheus myth and Aristotle's entelechy, the inherent purpose of a being.
It's wild how these ancient ideas are relevant in so many areas. What about education?
The Socratic method, with its questioning and critical thinking, that's still powerful, especially with online learning. AI platforms that personalize learning, that's an extension of this Socratic approach.
Interesting.
Plato's Academy, a center for collaboration and dialogue, that's a model for online learning communities.
Okay.
His idea of knowledge as remembering what's innate, that connects with constructivist learning, where students are actively building their understanding. And Aristotle, with his emphasis on classifying knowledge and the importance of practice,
Yeah.
that's like modern knowledge management and learning by doing.
So what about art and digital creativity?
Well, Plato's concept of mimesis, the imitation of reality, has new meaning with AI art. Algorithms creating images and music,
Yeah.
that raises questions about originality and what art is, just like Plato did. NFTs bring up ancient questions about authenticity and copies. Aristotle's idea of catharsis, purging emotions through art, that's like immersive VR experiences and storytelling. And Pythagoras and his harmony of numbers,
Right.
that's like algorithmic music and generative design using math to make art.
Okay, let's talk about the personal side.
Mm-hmm.
How does ancient philosophy apply to psychology and self-knowledge in our digital age?
The saying, know thyself, is interesting with our digital footprints and all the data we generate.
Right?
Tracking habits and moods with apps, that's like a data-driven way to know ourselves.
Right.
Epicurus and his emphasis on friendship,
Yeah.
that's especially important with social media and digital relationships. The Stoic practice of self-reflection, that's like mindfulness apps and digital self-assessment. And Stoic teachings on managing emotions,
Yeah.
that's essential for handling the stress of a digital world.
Okay, lastly, AI and consciousness. Did the Greeks have anything to say about that?
Plato's theory of forms, with its distinction between the physical and the abstract, that's a bit like abstract representations in machine learning.
Okay.
And Aristotle's focus on categories and reasoning is directly applicable to building AI that can classify and make inferences. And their ideas about the soul and consciousness, while not scientific in a modern sense, do provide context for our discussions about artificial consciousness and the ethics of creating intelligent machines.
This has been so thought-provoking. It's amazing how these ancient ideas are still relevant today.
Yeah, the insights of these ancient thinkers help us understand not only the foundations of knowledge, but also the challenges and opportunities we face with technology.
So listener, think about this. How could understanding these ancient debates help you navigate the ethical and technological landscapes of our future? Which of these thinkers and ideas resonates most with you? Thanks for diving deep with us.